Ciao Beatrice.
Ciao, hello, good afternoon everyone.
Good afternoon, and so your stage, now it's your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Giovanni.
Bye.
A presto. So, welcome again to the 24 hours design conversations. I'm Beatrice Villari. I am an associate professor at the Department of Design here at Politecnico di Milano. And I am also the co-director of the Specializing Master in Service Design here at Politecnico. So it's a pleasure to introduce a friend and a colleague, Carla Chipola from Brazil. So welcome, Carla. Good to see you. Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Bom dia. Wonderful. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I hope that everything is good there. So here we are. Yeah, we are starting to live the new normality, as they call it. But yeah, it's interesting. So welcome again, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Carla is associate professor at the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro. She works on social innovation and services, and we have some in common because we were PhD students together when she did her PhD journey here at Politecnico. And what I can remember before our talk is that if the crowd would like to interact with you, for example, if they have questions or comments at the end of the conversation, we can also leave some minutes to interact with them. So again, the word that Carla suggested us is vulnerabilidade. That means vulnerability. So, Carla, can you share with us why did you choose these terms and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice, for this. Vulnerability is a word that I have been working with since long, and since 2004, because in this interest, it started with the participation in research activities on design for social innovation. Because design activities for social innovation are oriented in different levels to process, to favor, enable, and support interpersonal relations. For example, trust, intimacy, creation of enhancement of community among individuals, and so on and so forth. So the concept of vulnerability and my interest on that emerged exactly as a key aspect when designing for interpersonal relations. And it's a very tricky word because you usually connect this word with negative thoughts or feelings or threats, but there are many different perspectives on vulnerability that are very important for design. Academics for many different fields have studied vulnerability, but two concepts of vulnerability I would like to highlight here and to nurture our conversation. The first one is related with the main perspective that I have been explored in design. So design for vulnerability is related with the first definition, first idea of vulnerability, and the second one have been developed and highlighted now with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the first one is the idea that vulnerability is a universal living condition. So we always live in a certain level of vulnerability. So this has been developed for scholars in ethics, philosophical anthropology, and feminist philosophy, among all others, that have conceptualized vulnerability as an ontological feature of human condition. So they dissociate the concept from negative connotations, such as victimhood, helplessness, neediness, pathology. So as an ontological feature of human condition, these authors propose a perspective that defines vulnerability as a lived experience. So this is our condition. We are vulnerable, and this is related with individual self-perception and discernment of the challenge you receive. So there is two dimensions of this, of course, our body. So we are vulnerable to threats to our body, to risks. And there is a vulnerability in our inherent sociality of human life. So we are vulnerable and dependent to other people. So this is our condition. We are always vulnerable. And this was the aspect that have been developed in design. So in this case, vulnerability in terms of the sociality of human life is openness to the otherness. So I make myself available for the encounter. So the risk is that the other can hurt me, can describe me, classify, oversimplify me, but this interpersonal vulnerability is very important because allow us to meet people. If I defend myself, I don't meet anyone. This is a very important aspect, right? So this is the first aspect. And the other dimension is the second dimension is externally evaluated risk. So COVID have highlighted this dimension. So the others are evaluating that I'm in risk. So I'm judged by external observers that I'm vulnerable. So they try to protect me. So health practitioners or general society, as I'm vulnerable. So it's not a lived condition. I need to be protected by someone. So the focus is placed on susceptibility of certain groups to be harmed. So, for example, there is a concern about increased health problems and higher risk among the elderly to get COVID-19. So vulnerability is not a lived experience of encounter with presences, and it's not something that is ontological part of me, but is defined by someone else that try to develop the socially sanctioned intervention to protect me. So we have these two dimensions of vulnerability. Of course, they are complementary. So we are vulnerable to the virus. So it's externally evaluated risks. And someone said, I cannot go around. I need to protect myself. Some policies we need to lock down. And there is this dimension of vulnerability as a lived experience. I live in relation with others. My body is vulnerable, and I am part of this. So these two dimensions of vulnerability is always is important to have in mind to understand also what are the challenges for design today in terms of interpersonal relations, in times of lockdown, and how we deal with just two dimensions of vulnerability that is necessarily for interpersonal relations also, but expose our body and how we deal with that. And the vulnerability that is evaluated for external people that say, okay, I cannot go around. I need to protect myself. So these are the challenges. And in design field, until now, we have developed the first perspective. Myself have been involved in research on that are related with the fact that how can we deal with vulnerability in interpersonal relations? So how can I enable relationships between people, design enablers to people to deal with their vulnerability? But the second one is something new for us. And we needed to think in design, how can we deal with that in COVID-19 situation? So there are some possibilities that I would like to explore with you, Beatrice, now.
Yeah, because I had a couple of questions in mind. So, but to reinforce the last message, okay. So the concept is very, very interesting, and of course we perceived our vulnerability. So we perceive that everything is vulnerable. So the environment, the human sphere as well, and the technology as well. So. And the last part of your discussion was linked to the design field. So, from your perspective, how can we include this term in the design process, or how can we imagine new solutions that embed this concept in the reality? So, I'm curious about that, and maybe from your experience, you have. Something to share.
Yeah, as I have mentioned, until now, design have dealt. I myself have researched on the first part. So vulnerability as a living human condition. So I needed to manage in design how people can be more vulnerable to each other in the social dimension, of course, to get in relation. So if I protect myself, I cannot enter in relation with anyone else. So there is a certain level of vulnerability in interpersonal relations. So we have in design developed the idea that we can design enablers to interpersonal encounters. So that could be an object or a process or many kind of enablers that mediate collaboration in interpersonal relations. So by steps or process, many kind of enablers have been explored in design research. But the second condition, vulnerability, that emerged and was highlighted now in COVID-19 is something that have been developed in many dimensions in design or engineering or many other fields. Academics have explored it, but mainly as a risk. So how can we avoid vulnerability?
Okay.
This is the difference. So we have in design embraced, and now we have this tension between two perspectives for design that is about, okay, let's consider vulnerability as a lived experience and embrace these interpersonal relations. But the second one said, this is a risk.
Yeah.
So we needed to develop some knowledge about how can we deal with this perspective, embrace, and intersect this with the concept of lived experience. So the risk don't close at us, but keep us, but of course not offering risks to our body dimension, of course.
Yes, of course. And I think that there's a huge room for experimentations and to experiment such topics in the design field. But I'm curious if you have examples or cases that we can consider as good practices, or again examples on this topic.
Yeah. For example. There is some cases. Have you heard about it? People in neighborhoods that have offered themselves to help elderly people to go to shopping and whatever.
Yeah.
So I felt that this was a very interesting example of how the two dimensions of vulnerability could be interrelated in design. For example, of course, this starts from a conception of a conceptualization of vulnerability on which, okay, I have an elderly person that is vulnerable, so it's concept two. So this person has risk. We need to isolate. We need to protect. Okay, is really the second dimension of vulnerability, and it's all right. Okay, they are more vulnerable in terms of risk that was defined by doctors and researchers on medicine, that they are at risk. Okay, but from this emerged the idea that neighborhoods could say, okay, I can go shopping for you, I can provide some, I make myself available to help you. So it results that the two dimensions of vulnerability goes together, because we have the vulnerability as a risk, the elderly are, but this became an opportunity. So we can say, this young person that will never get in contact with this person, this elderly person, will say, okay, I'm here. So the certain way, the second modality of vulnerability have enabled the first one as a lived experience, because this young person opened to the possibility of encounter, to enter in a lived experience, in move. So I'm not, this is a very initial, of course, we are some months in COVID-19 emergency.
Yeah.
But these are the first thoughts that came so in my mind. So I'm sharing with you in this conversation. So this idea that in design, so if you think on design in this situation, because in design so social innovation, we learn from society, right? So people are doing that. So someone arrived and put a stick of paper and said, I'm available to help. So we can think on this object as an enabler, as we have said before. So imagine if you have a design that said, I will put here a poster to people to volunteer to each other. This is done by citizens, but it could be done by designers, just an example. So you put a paper and then said, I volunteer. So we have designed an enabler based on a risk. So in vulnerability as risk, so elderly need to be protected, and open up the possibility for people to relate with each other. So we have a kind of very simple example, a support and enabler for interpersonal encounters. So it seems quite interesting for design to explore this perspective, and so to came from vulnerability as a lived experience, and embrace this externally evaluated risk, vulnerable populations, but anyway, we are all now vulnerable in the second meaning. So we are always, it's very interesting.
And we perceived a lot. We perceived a lot this situation. But thanks for enabling this discussion, and the enablers and the enabling concept is always important concept in the social innovation issues, and you are an expert in this field. And how do you let's say, how do you feel the match or the link between this idea of vulnerability or design including vulnerability and this idea of enablers in the social innovation issues? So what are the links in your idea, or what are what they have in common? Because I found this idea of enablers very interesting, and we always talk and think about enabling people, creating enabling platform, as Manzini says, no? So it's interesting to create this link.
Yeah, the concept of enablers in design for social innovation is that we cannot design directly interpersonal relations. I cannot say, look, have intimacy. A lot of ideas in social innovation require high level of interpersonal interactions. For example, trust, intimacy, and are examples. So when you have someone that collaborate with each other, that sharing situations or live together, so share the room, and many kind of social innovation process have a high level of interpersonal and encounters, qualities, and are very intensive encounters, interpersonal relations. But it was the origin of the discussion. So design cannot really say, okay, we are not puppets, so let's and make people relate with each other because we want to. So the issue is about the limits of design intervention. That's why I was so interested in vulnerability and entering these details, because this is something that is not like a wood that we as designers said, okay, I cut and make furniture.
Yeah.
This is a really delicate, sensitive matter for us to deal with. So the concept of enablers say, okay, I'm not designing interpersonal relations, but I'm enabling. So design is here. So I can fix, for example, a citizen, I can fix in my neighborhood a paper that said, okay, let's collaborate, but
how and
how do we motivate people to engage in these processes? So we have a lot to learn in social innovation. What motivates someone to stick this and put her name to offer volunteer to help elderly? So these studies on interpersonal relations and enabler comes as an idea that we cannot design. So the concept of enablers have been developed and designed for social innovation, but I really focus all these years in exploring how we can respect and deal with interpersonal relations in design. That's why vulnerability is a very important concept, but there are others. So intimacy, how you nurture. So for example, do you remember this project that have won? I think that they have won the Compasso d'Oro, Prende em Casa un Estudante. Host a student at home. So
some years ago.
You need to put together a very old project, and I don't know if it's still running, but you need to put young people with elderly people to live together with lots of benefits. But how do you put together these two different? So this was the origin of our discussion on, because it was a social innovation, but wow, how can I put someone from 70 years old with 17-year-old student to live together? How can we design this? So only enabling.
Yes, it's interesting because we face with intangible assets, so with values and with the intangible aspect that designers have to face with. So, and of course, it's a new, not new, so new, but it's a new topic. It's interesting to think about how designers need to face with intangible issues. So I think it's very interesting. So I think that we have more or less 7-8 minutes before ending our conversation. So I have two questions in mind for you. The first one is just to enable our conversation is did you feel so when did you feel vulnerable in this in the lockdown, for example? So and what do you missed in terms of solutions and or something that can avoid this feeling? So it's a very personal question.
Of course. The first was to, you talk about vulnerability, how you deal with vulnerability yourself. So I think that we here at our small group, the DESIS Lab, try to deal with that. Like, okay, how can we strengthen our relationships, and how can we do it in our project? So how can we deal with this two dimension of vulnerability? So we were developing a project in a neighborhood, and all of a sudden this project was we couldn't go to the square, the main square in the neighborhood, to develop the project. It was co-designing process with neighbors. And we thought, okay, how can we continue this project and this movement? So we started to say, okay, what can we help the neighbors, the community? How can we be an enabler for the community?
Mm-hmm.
And in our interpersonal relations there in this neighborhood, we discovered that small local producers were facing a lot of issues. They are very vulnerable, and they are trying to sell goods and keep the economy running. And they were one of them were also our friends. So how can we do something. So I think that the second dimension of vulnerability, so the first dimension of vulnerability, like as a lived experience, how can we face this together? And we start to move this online.
Mm-hmm.
So we make a network of small producers at the local level and put them in contact with the local consumers and showcase them and thinking on solutions to make this small local economy to run and to overcome together this limitation was very important. So to use also this external perceived vulnerability, that is the virus, our vulnerability to the virus, as also as an enabler for us to get together in a different dimension. What happens is that we were developing co-design projects at a local level, and now we developed an online solution for small producers that are becoming very important now.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are designing how can we put together these two projects, and because they are the same direction, online, offline, and we are exploring also how these two things could be. So it was a kind of quick reaction we have to go online, but keeping the roots at a local level.
Yeah. It's interesting how, let's say, to think about how to support them and how to help them in surviving, no? So from the kickstarting point to the end. We have like 2 minutes, so just to share with you our
not only help them to survive. I think that we survive together, because
you're right.
The way that we reinvent and we go to develop this project online and we keep the project running, it was a way for us to also keep our group together.
Yeah.
So because there was a kind of, oh, whoa, what's gonna happen? We are locked down. So it's a kind of synergy between different kind of vulnerabilities in this process.
And
but
again, enabling new relationships.
Enabling our relationships during the lockdown, going online, but keeping the reference to a straight defined territory that we're working with. So this was very interesting for us, because as a group we said, okay, let's go with our projects. Let's face our vulnerability to the virus, keeping up the interpersonal dimension. And very interesting, because it's also how we face fear. For example, there were groups that people were volunteering for helping each other, but people were afraid of each other in this locality, neighborhood. I don't know you. So a lot of interpersonal issues emerged, that people were, when you said, I don't trust you that you are volunteering to help me in this neighborhood list in Facebook. I don't trust you. So I said, okay, this is a very important issue on vulnerability. So people feel vulnerable and don't accept. This is a key design issue today. How can I help this collaboration to take place? Help, not design directly, but support this relationship to take place. So it's very, very interesting to how the different dimensions of vulnerability are playing today. And how we deal with that also in our very good question, in our personal group and personal level.
Yeah, very interesting. Carla, in the last minute, I just ask you, you already mentioned something, but if you have to link vulnerability to other words, like in 25 seconds, what are the other words that can be linked? So also for the others.
Yeah, for example, I take a look on 24 hours conversation, and I found some words that are really connected, like presence, interiority, trust, independence, relation, social innovation, people. And I will add other, that is intimacy. So a very connected in 24-hour conversation, all these words related with vulnerability. So that good, wonderful mind map will come out.
Yeah, I agree. So, Carla, a huge thank and also and virtual hug. I hope that we can meet in person soon. And thanks again for joining us. And now I say bye-bye, Carla, and take care and be safe.
Thank you.